Hi guys, this is Keri from the Deprogrammed podcast on Unsafe Space. This episode is pretty cool. Carter and I got to pre-record a conversation or an interview with one of my friends, April Rose. April describes herself as a classical liberal who has been negatively impacted by SJW culture, as have a lot of us. She is brilliant. You can follow her on Facebook at April Rose Newman. That's April Rose Newman, Newman. And yeah, she has a lot of interesting insights about SJW ideology and mental health issues, which I thought were fascinating. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did.
April, welcome to Deprogrammed. Thanks for
Hi.
coming on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, you have a history with social justice, people of the social justice persuasion, we'll say, and you've really been talking a lot about how you think there is psychological or mental issues that should be addressed. I don't want to say that you're claiming that social justice warriors are all crazy. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you do think there's some mental issues that have been manifesting themselves in, let's say, some of the crazier things we've seen in the public eye. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's true of SJWs. I think it's true of a lot of people who become very radical in their politics, like definitely not all, but people who kind of like start hyper-focusing on certain types of ideologies. They often had something happen to them, or, you know, whether it was just something recently in life or maybe their childhood or something, or even like a biological imbalance that they're kind of like using this cause or this lens that they view the world through with like their political ideology to kind of like try to deal with it or like channel all their angst they're having. That's what I think does happen a lot of the time.
What are some examples?
Can I step back for a second, Carter, and ask
You can do
just
whatever you want, Keri.
yeah, just some context on April and what community she is from, because we met online, and I can't remember. It was a mutual friends comment section, and I was like, "Oh, this girl is smart, and she's she's got some opinions that I share, and I want to, So we started talking, and light on that conversation, just about what was your background? Because I was SJW, you know that, like I was full on a true believer. Where were you at, and where are you now?
I was like a mix of like some type of libertarian most of my life and my adult life, with like some liberal leaning socially. Like, you know, I had like looking back on it, like I had like little SJW moments, but I think most like empathetic people have SJW moments, you know, where you get like a little like moment over something you see or some cause, you know, for a day or a month or something that you know, just kind of like gets you going. I think I was sort of like that kind of a person for a long time, but I was generally speaking, like a lot of my politics used kind of like tended towards libertarian. I haven't been very like hardline total libertarian since I was about 20 years old, because the more time I was in the real world, the more I felt that it wasn't compatible with reality. But yeah, you know, so the more I talk to libertarians, they're kind of like talking to communists. But that's
Hey, now watch it.
another subject entirely.
I'm probably more libertarian than libertarians generally. So I'm happy, but I'm open to debate. So I'm not religious about it.
So it's like, it's, you know, and there's a lot of things that I like about it too. You know, it's not all of it, but you know, there's some things that now that it's libertarianism has been getting more popular and vocal since our last election cycle, because people are feeling like they're at a lack for options. So I did get involved for a little while, trying to help my local libertarian party have meetings and things like that. So I wasn't involved in it for very long, and I'm still, you know, I'm still in touch with some of those people. They're like all very nice people. Nothing like horrible happened with it, but it was just kind of like the more I talked to these people who were completely immersed in the party and doing things, and the more I talked to them about things, I'm like, I don't know how much of a real libertarian I am at this point. Like, this just seems, some of their stuff, I'm like, it's kind of nuts. I'm like, yeah, I get it. On paper, yeah, it should work. it's supposed to work. It's kind of like talking to someone who about their religion was kind of how I felt.
How have you changed? Because I don't want to have a libertarian debate. How have you changed?
Or how did you start observing, like what part of you is in the SJW world? I guess I'll put it that way.
What part of me? Well, I mean, I grew up in the area that I am now, which is the Boston area, which is pretty liberal. So, you know, I lived here. I moved around the area outside of the city, and I lived in South Florida for a couple of years. Then I came back. Florida is a very mixed state, obviously. South Florida kind of tends to liberal, but it's a little bit of everything. You got people from like all over the world there and all over the country. And I'm back here again, and it does tend to be liberal. So a lot of the people that I grew up around, like, even like a good chunk, not all, but a good chunk of my childhood friends are extremely liberal. So I was always a pretty open person, so I'm lucky I have like a big spectrum of friends, like spectrum of beliefs all over the political, ideologies and all over the, nuances, everything in between. So I'm lucky that I've kept that around me, but I did have a good chunk of extremely liberal people who just were kind of like born and raised in that, and they're just, that's it, So that was okay for a long time. It started to be not okay after Trump got elected. And there were even like a couple things, obviously there's some things socially I'm still liberal about that I can agree with, but it just got to be too much, and I didn't really, the first glimpse I got of there being a problem was around 2014. Some younger people I would talk to told me about things they were seeing on college campuses that I think we know more about now, but it wasn't being widely publicized back then. You could go and find it on YouTube, but it wasn't being circulated. It wasn't really being talked about. And it was still kind of like contained onto campus culture or younger people who were being exposed to it. And it was right around the time that Black Lives Matter popped up, like suddenly overnight as like a thing all over the country. And one of my younger friends was saying to me, like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of weird, but I also think they kind of have a point. Maybe it might be like this, it might be like that. And then the more they were discussing it with me and kind of showing it to me in context of this SJW culture that was emerging out of colleges, I was like, yeah, this is kind of weird. But part of me was like, yeah, but they're in college, right? Usually like a lot of college students go through that phase. For decades now, we would see some college kids, they'd get really extreme kind of SJW-ish, and then they quickly outgrow it and they go and they get a job and they just become normal. That's what it used to be. Remember, right? They would have that phase and they get over it, right?
Not me.
So, well, that's what I started to notice, that because I remember saying that to my younger friends. I'm like, I think this might be calming down, but this does look worse, but they're in college still, And he was just like, I don't know, this is something different. And he started showing me more things. And I was like, okay, yeah, we may have something else going on. And then kind of fast forward a few years, it started to kind of like very slowly trickle like into mainstream. Like now it's to the point, the whole SJW thing, everybody talks about it now. Like baby boomers are aware of it now, which is, which means it's a, like, you know what I mean? Like a known thing. So, but after Trump got elected, it started to like kind of kick up with people in my group. Like I'm going to be 38, so people in my age group, just kind of getting like this like crazy moral outrage over things that they weren't even like, they were just reacting to. They weren't even properly researching. Like one of my childhood friends stopped talking to me when Trump did he made a tweet about transgender people in the military, where he said that there was going to be like a ban on transgender people joining the military. So because, I have that sensitivity, I'm also sensitive. Like, it's not like I don't care about other people or other groups of people. So whenever the news would report this like huge disaster, I would always go, okay, well, if that's really happening, like if we have a president or someone in the White House who's actually like just oppressing people and making these horrible policies, like I need to know about it, and I need to know more details, and I need to know exactly what was written into that policy and who was behind it and who, like, whatever I can find out, on the internet or the news. So I'd go reading about it with the intention to know. And I always came back with, oh, that's not really what happened. Like, people aren't being attacked. So like when he made the transgender tweet, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, I get it. It was kind of crass Trump style. Like, if I was going to make an announcement like that, that's not quite how I'd do it. So I kind of understood that. But when I went and I read up on it, I was like, that's not exactly what's happening. Like, I read into it and I had to go back like several years and into the study that Obama did and how bad that study was that Obama did and how dangerous that and careless that study was that Obama did. And really just that it was the military making a plea to Trump to say, can we like redo this with our own studies? We have our own scientists, we have our own people and doctors that can figure out how we can integrate the transgender population in a way that makes sense and that is like sensible and safe for the military. And so Trump was basically saying there's a freeze on transgender enrollment, and that's really what it meant, was that they were doing more work on it. They weren't permanently banning transgender people. They were kind of just saying, the military wants time to take their own look at it and figure out how that will look and how that will roll out and what kind of policies they'll need around that. So it was when that happened and I posted something about it on Facebook. This person just completely lost their mind on me. And this is someone I've known since I was 13 and we know each other very well. She knows the kind of person I am, inside out, upside down. I mean, I'm not, to know me as a person and like my habits and my mannerisms, I'm the furthest thing from some like extreme right-wing bigoted person. And,
right. You're not a trans bigot is what you're telling us. And she knows that.
Like, she should know that. She should know that. I've dated men, I've dated women, I've dated transgender people before that was trendy to be transgender. Like, anybody was talking about that. There were a lot of things that, about me. So yeah, it was just kind of surprising to see like how in this frenzy she was over it, and that she completely decided to stop talking to me over this. And I let her, because I'm like, this is just something that it's like losing someone to an addiction or something. Like it's something that just takes somebody over, and there's only so much I can do about it. I mean, I could have probably tried to be the one to like extend an olive leaf and say, hey, do you want to talk about this more? But I was kind of like, she just started to become so inappropriate. I felt like it was a non-workable situation. So, I mean, that's when I kind of realized, I realized things were getting intense, but that's when I realized like, my life was going to change over this, and a lot of people's lives were changing over this. That was, I think, a couple years ago now. So
comparing it to an addiction, I think that's a great analogy. I've sometimes compared it to a virus or a sickness, but it takes over, and it becomes the lens through which they view everything. And there is something there. You said she went into a frenzy. There's something there that's, I don't know if like the fact that it's happening collectively, people are like feeding off, like mob mentality. They're feeding off of each other's energy and outrage over it. It escalates.
And getting it back to mental illness, because we're not even talking about people who are like out going to rallies or still in college and around like the group frenzy. This is somebody in, just as an example, but this person has obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's not specifically managed or medicated. Like, she's not in any kind of treatment for it. She knows that she has it. It was diagnosed. This is somebody who has this disorder. She's otherwise functional, like she can keep a job, she's married, she has kids, but it impacts her all the time. And like growing up, I know her very well, so it's like, none of us are perfect. Like we all have friends with like idiosyncrasies. So it was like, I would know about these things that I would make her do. And there were certain things, I don't want to get like completely into her business, but there were like addictive tendencies she had too. And things that were literally just explosive, compulsive things. It's like such a disorder would prompt. So it is like, there's like a link there. It's like people who have these, I do think that people who have these kind of like mental proclivities are more susceptible to it.
So actually, Keri, you've talked about in the past. You've talked about mental illness or even just emotional trauma or personal issues being kind of a badge of honor in the social justice camp, and it's another group to be in when you're looking at intersectionality. If you can add on, well, I also have borderline personality disorder, therefore I'm even more oppressed. Do you think this is related? Does it create a culture where it's actually not fashionable to treat the illness, because if you heal, then you're no longer a victim?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have seen profiles like that, even where in their identity on Twitter, people are putting all their different categories of oppression. It's like Black, queer, woman, anxiety disorder, and OCD, and it's listed as, this is one way in which another way in which I'm oppressed, and because it's a social currency to be oppressed within the ideology, I think it encourages. I think it exploits any existing mental illness that a person has, but it also encourages them to stay in it. So there's not as much of an incentive to get better, because they're telling people this is part of your identity. Like stay in it.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's striking me as related is, in the past when you went to college, I mean, certainly I was much more of an ideologue when I went to college. I think as a lot of, freshmen going in, they think they know everything, and I had to be confronted with arguments that I hadn't thought of and things that were offensive to me, and I changed. I wouldn't say maybe I changed a little bit during college, but by the time I graduated, like after college, I made a pretty radical shift in my belief system, and I think I became much more open-minded and much more willing to hear arguments and opinions that I disagreed with or even was maybe offended by, but I wanted to kind of understand. And to some extent, doing that forces you to confront your own demons, because often when we react to something we don't like, it's an emotional reaction. It's based on something we're not reacting to what's happening in the moment. We're reacting to something else that's in the past. And to realize, like, oh, I'm behaving irrationally, I'm acting irrationally, I'm reacting irrationally to this, kind of forces some introspection and some growth. But if you're in a college community, which I think most colleges are like this now, if you're in a college community in which you're being protected from hearing anything that you disagree with, or that confronts preconceived notions, or that just upsets you in any way, and if you can just say, hey, Ben Shapiro shouldn't come speak on campus because I'm triggered, and you've got university administrators who will back you up on that and say, yes, you should be coddled and protected from these things, it means that you never really have to deal with any of the issues that your own kind of personal psychology. You never have to have that introspective look at yourself.
Right. I used a term the other day about the IEPs that kids get put on now, that they're not taught to, like they say in 12-step groups, meet life on life's terms. Or meet your environment on the environment's terms.
What is an IEP?
Individualized education plan. So it's what they do in schools now. Well, technically, I think they've existed since the 70s, but now the way they do it is they're more common. So, on one hand, it can be good because they got better at diagnosing kids with things. Like you could know that your 5-year-old has Asperger's or ADHD. So it's kind of good to have that knowledge now, where we didn't like 25 years ago. But now they have this thing where the parent can go ask for an IEP, and legally they have to be given the IEP. So then the teacher's forced to follow the IEP, and the IEP will have like certain guidelines in it that are specific to whatever the diagnosis was.
Wow. Okay. So I heard some teachers in South Carolina talking about this when I was home last year, and I didn't know the word for it, but they were talking about how it's getting so hard to control students because they each have their own diagnosis. And so if a guy, let's say a student throws violent tantrums in class, they can't punish him because that's part of his diagnosis, that he throws violent tantrums.
Right, right. No, and that's part of it. And there are some variations state to state. And I'm not a teacher, so don't quote me too much on this. I'm just telling you off of what I know from what I've seen. My partner's a teacher, but he's a Montessori teacher. He's not in a public school. And then I had, a lot of family members, younger kids in my family. Some of them were on IEPs and the stuff. So I do have familiarity on it through that. And it is this thing where it's like, if you like take a step back and look at it, ideally it should probably be that the teachers are good enough at what they do and have enough familiarity with different disorders that it can be left to their discretion how they want to reach that kid and manage that kid. And maybe they do want to tailor things for that kid, which is okay, but it should be like a case-by-case basis that the teacher can control. But it's kind of like they've taken that trust away and going, well, it's the child's right to have, or the parent's right to request for it to be handled like X, Y, and Z. And obviously there are things you can like argue for the benefits of that. Like I get it. And like, I had a ton of stuff that wasn't diagnosed as a kid. Like, I get it. Like, I still, I have things that I have like a severe sleep disorder. There's so many things like when I was a kid that now would have been like, I would have been in a sleep study. I would have had all kinds of like they did evaluate me when I was a kid, but the way they did it was differently back then. So they, they didn't really see everything and they didn't know how to look for certain things. But, like going back to like when I was in grade school in the 80s, but like, so there's like arguments you can make like, oh yeah, that's great that, to like be aware of something and then figure out workarounds. But then it just turns into like accommodating it and kind of like cushioning it. And that doesn't work either. And I'm seeing with like, in my job, you can tell the kids that come out of college that were on these IEPs, you can tell them because they can't handle anything. Some of them are very nice kids and they're not jerks or anything. They can't adapt. They can't like move quickly. They don't respond to stress the same way, so that's kind of sad. So then, you wonder,
it's a skill they don't get to practice.
It's just a total trade-off then, One of the big ones is like the way that they give extra time. Kids with autism and ADHD get extra time to finish things. I'm like, how does that prepare them at all for the real world? Like, how does that even, this young girl was working with me and she was like, well, I had, in college and high school, they gave me extra time to finish things. So I need more time to make my sales goals. I'm like, no, no one gives a shit.
Sorry.
I don't care. I need you to make numbers. I don't care.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's not helping them. That's for sure.
No, I mean, it could be like, I get the idea of it, but is it really? No, probably. I don't know that it's helping them enough. It could be helping them if you have like all the right ingredients. I don't think the IEP is like a measuring stick to be like, oh yeah, we're definitely fixing this more for everyone across the board. It's, the cocktail of like parents being involved the right way and understanding things the right way, and then having teachers who can really get it for that kid. And, it's like the whole group being involved for that kid. It's not like an IEP is going to magically fix it. It doesn't.
Well, and it seems like it could be making it worse because you're not exposing them to, as I think Keri just said, you're not exercising that muscle. So, it seems like if you've got ADHD and that causes you to take more time to do things, then the workaround is teach them how to get things done and commit to things that they know they can do in whatever time frame, so that when they get out in the real world, they're not missing deadlines. Maybe they have to say like, well, I can't work for you if those are my sales goals. Like, I can't meet those sales goals, so I guess I need a different job. Like, that's not like knowing their limits.
Exactly. Know your limitations or learn how to push them, and so you can manage them differently. So you can kind of not be as limited in some ways, at least, right? Mm-hmm. Just make it work.
Right. I mean, it would be unthinkable for us if there was someone, for example, who was physically handicapped, saying, well, I plan to play in the NBA when I graduate, so I need a special IEP for basketball, and like I need special permission. So, and then then they get out and they go to the NBA and like, my baskets should be 20 points each, and also I should get that like rocket shoes
Yeah.
and whatever. It's like, well, that's not how it works. You're just
It's
going to be
a
disappointed.
idea. It's a similar idea. It's also the idea that, like, yeah, and a lot of kids with these things, they do have talents and they do have strengths. It would be better to just like work with those talents and be like, okay, well, how can you make this into maybe a career, or build this into something that you can eventually monetize? I mean, it's like, I remember hearing from someone who took the Gallup survey. I haven't taken it myself, but I spoke with someone who's very into the Gallup survey, and the people behind that, they said that when you spend time on things that you're not good at over, like, say, like several weeks, you improve in that thing maybe 10-15%. When you spend that same amount of time on something you're already good at it, you improve in it maybe 1,000 times. So there's that too. Like, okay, well, what don't you suck at? There are things that you
and
don't
I mean, look,
suck
there's plenty of, especially in the creative fields. I mean, there's plenty of massively dysfunctional artists who are also fabulously wealthy and successful. They just they know their limitations, and they have business managers and other people around them, and you know, maybe they can't even make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but damn, they can write lyrics, and that's, or whatever it is. It's like, okay, they've made that their career.
Get good at that, right? Yeah, and I'm a big believer in that. And going back to all this stuff, like wearing your mental illness like a badge. Yeah, that's a thing now, and we're seeing it. A big place that people are seeing it now are on dating apps, dating sites.
Oh, tell me about this. I've not heard this.
I see this because, okay, I think I narrowly missed this because I met my partner about 3 years ago, and we did meet online, but it was kind of like we met like in that year before the presidential campaign started, and right before that, or around when that stuff was ramping up, something like that kind of time frame. So it wasn't getting like to that this thing that exploded afterwards. But now a lot of my single friends that are on these apps, you open them up and it'll be the first thing on their profile. They'll be like, because you know how sometimes they'll do like bullets, you know, it'll be like mom, dog lover, whatever. Now it'll be, you know, bipolar disorder, more and it is, it's like they're just like,
run screaming,
me, you know, like this is like, that's okay, great. Or they like putting queer on everything now, which is really easy to make fun of because queer is like, it's not even a very definable word.
Right.
Like, what is that? I mean, that's okay, you can call yourself that, but it's just okay.
Human.
You know, it's on like human. It's on your dating profile. It should be saying something about you, and it's like a little unclear what that means now. So there's that kind of a thing where it's like, this is part of my identity, and it's just gotten very strange. It's gotten very strange. I'm not entirely sure where it's going.
I think it's almost like the we did a whole episode about the body positivity movement, and about how you start. It's almost like you start with a noble goal, which is to destigmatize mental illness, for example, or to stop shaming people for being overweight, which are both noble goals, to encourage people to accept themselves so that they can get healthier. But that noble goal is then taken to the extreme where it's like, it's not just that we're going to destigmatize mental illness, it's that we're going to tell you that it's a perfectly acceptable long-term way to live and to celebrate it and encourage it. And the same thing with obesity. It's like, now I'm seeing articles saying that there's nothing that actual scientific facts that it, you know, don't exist, that it's not unhealthy for you. And so they start with something noble and then they push it to such an extreme. And then if you try to criticize it, they go back to that original noble goal. And they're like, well, you must be trying to stigmatize mental illness, or you must be trying to fat shame. It's like, no.
And it's so much emotional labor with these people.
Yes.
To walk through it with them and try to like maybe correct it, or even get to like bridge that space to them, being like, no, I'm not against having like some compassion and some acceptance, but X, Y, and Z. And it's so much emotional labor to connect with those people in that way, if it even works, which it might not work, or, you know, they'll have varied levels of success, or they'll finally, you know, after half an hour, they're like, oh, okay. And the next day they're just talking about the same thing, you know, and it's all right. This is just normal for a lot of people to think this way now.
I don't want to excuse the people on the right that are also kind of ideologues and we'll say crazy to some extent. But I do think the left has had this perceived monopoly on empathy for decades. And there's this, at least among the left, there's this assumption that if you don't agree with them, you're not an empathetic person. And I think having not been really on the left, I mean, I was classical liberal for a while. I guess that's as close as I get to being on the left. But I don't see that on the right. I don't see that in the center. I don't see that elsewhere in kind of classical liberals and stuff. I don't see people saying, oh, they want, I don't know, oh, they want welfare, they must hate poor people and want to keep them in a poor life. It's like, no,
like
we don't say that. We just say you're probably just misinformed. Let me explain to you why the Green New Deal is a bad idea or whatever it is. People don't assume that they're just evil-hearted, cold-hearted sociopaths. But the left seems to assume that anyone who disagrees with them is
evil.
Yeah, well, they take a lot of moral high ground, like the religious right used to a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's what struck a chord for a lot of people with Jordan Peterson, even though he has a lot of limitations too. And there's been, since he became mainstream, I still like that he's there and that he exists, but he's kind of disappointed myself and some people in ways with what we thought he was going to continue to go on to do. But what people have liked about him is that he has that just devastatingly reasonable way of saying things, that you have to go into every single thing they say, prefacing it with, oh no, I get your concern. I want poor people fed too, but this is why this particular plan won't work. Look at what happens. You have to break it all down to them, but you have to put that, again, it's the labor is on us to kind of it's like talking to small children.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
That's an insult to small children, but
even they're easier, right? I know.
I mean, I'm actually serious about that. I mean, kids don't just assume you're evil if you disagree. If you say, well, that's just not the best way to do it, in my opinion, they're like, oh, okay. But yeah, there is something about, I mean, it's got to be feeding this reaction has to be feeding some psychological need where they need to get angry. They need to call you evil. They need to feel, I don't know what it is. I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, but it's got to be it's got to be fulfilling a need psychologically, right?
It's also stimulating. I mean, that kind of anger and angst and all that stuff is very stimulating.
What do you mean by stimulating?
Well, if you're, chemically deficient in some serotonin or, and anything like that, even bad things make you feel good. They found that in studies, that's why you get addicted to negativity, because it still creates, there's this whole thing about when we were hunter-gatherers and lived in the wild, everything gave us a dopamine rush because it was a survival situation, a lot of fight or flight things we were presented with every day. So you would get if something great happened, you got a dopamine rush. If something horrible happened, you still had this impetus to survive it and run away or do something, and you still get a dopamine rush for it. They found that our brain is still the same from that, because that was on the evolutionary timeline, it was 30 seconds ago, we were living as hunter-gatherers. So, our brains are designed to get a hit of these chemicals for any kind of stimulating situation. And that's a lot of stimulation right there.
So that explains a lot of drama.
Oh yeah.
Great drama, even the way that we watch soap operas, the way people, all kinds of addictions, even people who cut themselves, because that was one of the first places they started to notice that was something weird going on. They were well, they're cutting, but when they cut, they get this euphoric feel after they self-harm, and they're actually getting, their brain is releasing more dopamine again. And they used to think that was something, I remember reading, there were some studies suggesting they thought that was a unique problem to cutters, but then they found out later on, they're no, we're all doing this all the time. And some people have a better, more homeostasis in their mental biology, where there aren't as many extremes and they're not seeking as many extremes. They don't seek as much, novelty seeking and all that kind of stimulating activity that's more disruptive. But a lot of us do, because that's just how we used to live. So yeah, no, feeling you're on a moral outrage or something's happening to you and you're surviving it and all that kind of stuff. Really, it's addictive.
Well, that's pretty depressing. I don't know how we're going to solve that.
Well, we already have ways to solve it. It's just people don't want to put the work in. I mean, like a lot of like successful world religions have presented ways to survive that with like meditation and prayer and all that kind of a thing to kind of like, you know, it puts you in habits that kind of keep resetting your brain. And then just like healthy habits like exercising and things like that still give you that chemical release. Or that, you know, maybe it's like, you know, it could be as long as you're not deep end addicted to it, maybe it's playing video games or, you know, like things that are okay to do for like a half an hour here and there. But there's ways you can get that. And like, if you keep like a good community around yourself, you have some good friends and you go out and do things, or you have a family that's healthy, there's ways to do it. It's just,
I think this is why it's also SJW ideology is very anti-exercise and they're anti-prayer.
Really? I didn't know this. It's anti-exercise?
Oh yeah, this is related to the body positivity movement we talked about. If you talk about exercise in a positive way, they say you're triggering them. They don't want to hear about your body success. They don't want to hear about your exercise. There's just this really negative way of talking about it, as if only a meathead or only, you know, would care about exercising, and it's denigrated in a way. So exercise is denigrated, prayer is denigrated. We see that all the time, and we don't want your thoughts and prayers kind of thing. It's looked at in a negative way. And then the weird thing is there are some areas like meditation that they don't have that same level of denigration for meditation yet. But they're starting to have it for yoga. And the way they're doing it for yoga is by saying that everyone is culturally appropriating yoga. Right. Therefore, if you're doing yoga, you must be a racist white woman. And it's this idea of like, don't talk about yoga either. So you just mentioned some very healthy ways that people can reset their brain, the way you put it. And it's in a lot of those ways, they're kind of culturally within the SJW culture, they're taboo. You're not supposed to talk about your exercise or your prayer or engage in it, you know?
They're often against families too. I mean, in a measure, because they're into, you know, like, sure, like gay people getting married and adopting kids, that's great, you know, but they're against a lot of the things that kind of support and allow for families to happen and to be together and stay together, you know, and stay close and loyal to each other, which also gives you that kind of like mental stability, you know. So no, I see it. I see what they're doing. And I, you know, like there was always those little undercurrents of things that were like you said, like, oh yeah, no, you have a point there. And now they've just gone totally crazy. Like I remember being really into yoga 8 years ago, and there'd be that occasional blog of someone like making fun of it, like how funny it is that in the West we're into it and we don't even understand the philosophy behind it the right way. And it's like, oh no, yeah, that's true. You have a point. Like I remember like reading that stuff and being like, oh, you know, that's, but now it's just like, it's stupid. Now it's just, okay, so we won't do anything.
Yeah.
We won't borrow anything good from any other cultures, and then we will be ashamed of our own culture as well, and we will just have nothing to make you happy.
Yeah,
except
weird,
dopamine hits.
Those are the same people that generally really stress how much the U.S. is a melting pot, and it is in many ways. But like, if we're not allowed to take other ingredients and put it in the pot and melt it, then what are we? Like, they
don't view it as a melting pot. They view it as a salad. Yeah, that's the problem.
What's the
like,
difference? A
melting pot.
Tomatoes are still separate from the lettuce.
Yes.
In the salad.
Yes, they view it like a salad, and everything is just remains separate from each other, but all together. A melting pot means that we borrow from each other's cultures and we trade and we become cohesive.
We evolve together as our own.
And we evolve together, and we have a cohesive unity. It's like if you look at tribalism and the things that unite us. If a melting pot is a great analogy because it's like America is a melting pot. Yes, you're bringing in all these different people from different countries, but we're all assimilating into one united tribe, and then we have the smaller tribes underneath. They view it like a salad. There is no united tribe. That's what they hate. They don't like any type of patriotism. Because they don't view that
I don't
united
even view it really as patriotism. I mean, I don't view us united under a flag. I view us united under the ideas of the Enlightenment, right? We're united under this idea that there's individual rights and limited government, and like those are.
They don't believe in that stuff.
Special things. Yeah, I get that, but that's the melting pot. Interesting.
No, but they don't realize that that's where all of this was spawned from. They don't want to acknowledge that that's the stem of all of this is the Enlightenment period, individual sovereignty, all that stuff is what makes it possible. The idea of a social contract is why you have people of different backgrounds come together and like share this unity of like one country and kind of become the same culture. The whole point was to become the same culture. That was part of the social contract. The social contract wasn't to say like, okay, we're gonna all stay totally separate and we're gonna be like a salad and we're gonna be. It's funny you said salad because the other day I was talking about like different slices from different pies. Like we have to be an equally measured slice. And it has to be its own thing. It has to be that's really not, and that doesn't measure the value of a country either. Like, oh, the US isn't as good because there aren't these perfectly equal slices of each type of cheesecake. And that why does that make it less, at what point is diversity just a joke on itself? Because if it's forced diversity, is it diversity anymore? If it's just like, the rainbow they use that has like perfectly measured amounts of the same color, if everything is like that, is it diversity anymore?
No. Yeah, you're reminding me of an opinion that I have, which is probably will get me called lots of nasty names, but I've been thinking about this with respect to Europe. So when I was younger, I spent a lot of time, not a lot, but I traveled a lot for business, and I was in lots of different countries in Europe. And one of the things I liked about it was, France was France, and Italy is Italy, and they're very different. And Greece is Greece, and the UK was the UK. But there seems to also be this push that, like, they want everything to be all one salad. Like, if to use Keri's analogy, like, France is... They want France to be the same salad as Italy, which is the same salad as Greece, which is the same salad. Like, when you don't let people isolate cultures and protect their culture, right? Which the French, for example, have been very good at historically, right? They have rules about language and everything else. They're very snobby, and there's things I don't like about the French culture, but it's the French culture, and you can go experience it. And I wonder about my daughter growing up. I'm like, will she really get to experience these other cultures? Because they're all kind of collapsing into this salad of a bunch of stuff, and if it's a salad, then what's the difference between France and Italy at some point? It's like it won't.
There's balance there. They're going too far the other way because it's good to have some protectionism than not, but we also know that when cultures go total isolationist, eventually that's not good.
Right, and I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah.
That gets bad too, but we're going too far the other way. It's just like, hey, who cares about identity is fluid? It's like, no, it's not. It's not. Like, I'm more apt to agree with you that these countries should be protecting themselves a little better. And that it's just an anthropological reality we can't really get away from, right? People do better when they have, a sort of shared identity. And some values that they all agree on, and kind of it creates more trust. We know these things, so people do better with these things. So, and then you start to put on your tinfoil hat, even though you don't want to, and wonder why are all these countries being pressured into taking in all of these cultures, and some of them are bad cultures. And
you're not allowed to say bad cultures, though, April. That's
we should be able to say that. We should be able to say that because cultures aren't equal. There's practices that are better than others. And why are all of these countries suddenly, like, especially the westernized countries, being pressured like it's a moral obligation to take in people from all these places, just like in a very raw sense, not like just indiscriminately, not like, well, yeah, no, we will selectively let people in who seem to
merit-based.
Merit-based, have something to offer, have their P's and Q's together a little bit, and we understand why they want to come here and what they want to do. Just bring them in, like just ship them in, and drop them here. You start wondering, why are they doing it to all these countries? And it's creepy. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not saying that it's like the Illuminati alien people taking us over, but it is creepy.
Yeah, no, I don't want to tinfoil hat it either, but I do think that fundamentally the social justice, and I've said this before, Keri and I have talked about this, I think the social justice ideology at its core is not about building anything, it's about destruction of Western civilization. And so they don't care. They want people in specifically to destroy Western civilization. After that, what it is not, that there's no goal. They're not trying to build a particular thing.
They'll use cultural relativism to destroy like other cultures.
Yeah, that's why they don't complain about, like, when you were saying, like, they complain about prayers, but not meditation. Well, that's why. They're starting to complain about yoga because too many white women do it. Like, that's why. Like, it's...
Right.
That's why they attack it.
Right. I mean, I think, when I follow it through, when you destroy strong culture, they're just easier to control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's
simple as that. It's as
right.
simple as that. They're easier to control. They're easier to take money from, just take everything from. So I think I think ultimately that's kind of what's behind it. I don't know. I'm not saying I know like what the, any more details than that. It's just, I can't make any other sense of it except the fact that obviously the people influencing it and financing it, they're educated people. They're, in different countries. Some of them are here, some of them are in Europe. They're very educated people, and I don't know why else they would be pushing for this.
It's a power play, I think.
Yeah.
Keri, what do you think?
I think it's a power play, but more than that, I mean, I have a friend who's like, "Do you think people are sitting in back rooms plotting?" And I'm like, "No, it's just that's not what I mean. People tend towards people at the top. Sometimes are people in control. Not always at the top. There's not always." What's the word? There's not always corruption, in a hierarchy. But if there is corruption in a hierarchy, you're going to see people at the top who, of course, are making decisions that make it easier for them to control, like you said, large populations. But more than that, I think it's that ideology itself. Ideology is almost like a living thing. And so a lot of times it has end goals that the little individual foot soldiers aren't even cognizant of.
Right.
And so it's like a school of fish or something. You're all swimming towards this destination, but you're not really aware of what the ultimate end goals are. You're just kind of talking with your buddy about, how woke you are today. You're not really focusing on the big picture. It's just these little individual outrages, and everything you choose to push on an individual day has repercussions way down the road, but you can't see what those are yet.
Yeah, I think there are very few people who even could see that or would want to see that and could even contemplate the big picture where this could go.
Right, but if you do contemplate it, or if you talk about it like we do, you have to figure out how to talk about it in a way that makes sense. This goes back to what April was saying about like talking to children. And I think what she meant there, at least I was hearing, is like talking in a way that doesn't sound like you're a tinfoil hatter. Because if you say too much of this, people are like, "Oh, you're crazy." It's like, no, I'm just trying to explain this big picture view in a way that makes sense. And you can't give like, it's like, "Oh, the Marxists are trying to destroy the world," and we were like, "Oh, you're crazy."
Right? Yeah.
Because that's what's happening now. Is now the right is starting to go crazy with it. They're actually starting to go crazy. It's just starting, but now we've got all these race realists popping up all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, I'm talking to them online. They're on my. You may have seen them like jump in on my page. It's like, and there's like buried in there. They do kind of have a point, but everything else around it and their end solution that they want really isn't good either.
Oh yeah, I've seen these. There's one on my wall, and I understand. I think she's a great case study because she used to be an SJW, and now she's become like identity politics, but on the other side, and is talking about wanting to have a white nation state and things like that. I'm like,
Vanity Politics SJW. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
You should speak to that, April, because I think when you and I first talked, you had a great point about how you started to see some former SJWs who are now behaving in all the same ways. They're just focusing their ideology around anti-SJWism or...
So I had an experience with a group of people who were seeing this, happen. And they were definitely otherwise liberal in many ways, culturally liberal, their interests, their personality, a lot of their values, liberal. But they started to see how crazy this was going. And, it's like just as much mental illness there, the SJWs, because it's almost like two mentally ill people. When you think of two mentally ill people throwing stones at each other to feel better about themselves, or the way mentally ill people project things on each other. So it's almost like they're opposing that SJW agenda, but in a weird way, it is like a sort of infighting. And it is their own kind of obsession to be like, oh, now the SJWs are doing this, now they're doing that. You know, one of the people I got close to who was very like funny and charismatic, and you know, this was somebody who podcasted too, and you know, it was like a lot of great insights there, a lot of great points, a lot of great kind of seeing what people like us are going through, being alienated from friends and all this kind of a thing, and would go on at great length about like how pathological that behavior is. And then the more I got to know him, I'm like, but you're kind of a sociopath too. Like he was kind of like, nobody was projecting all of it on these, because it's like the SJW culture is very empathy based, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people in the SJW culture who are legitimately empathetic, and their empathy's been hijacked. Then you've got people who are just being manipulative and they're acting like they're nice. Just like, again, if you go back to the old time religious right, you had those people who became pastors or were like volunteering at the church the most, who were really horrible people. And they were really just stepping into it the most to look like a good person and to take advantage of people's vulnerabilities and gain trust. So it's like the SJW culture is similar, where there's people with good intentions in there, but you have these like the grass. You know how those jokes they make about male feminists now being like closet rape, kind of like that. So he was very hung up on calling that out, but he thinks they're all like he is projecting himself on all of it, like assuming anybody standing up saying this has hurt me, anybody standing up saying, well, I want something done because this group is being hurt, I'm being hurt. He assumed all of them are lying.
Because he was.
That's who he is.
That's who he was as an SJW. He was one of the ones with bad intent. Yeah.
And he, you know, everything he did, you know, the more I kind of like, because this was somebody I knew in real life too. It wasn't just like an internet connection, but he had like a little discussion group on Facebook, and he would podcast. And it was really just that. I mean, it was really just his fixation on thinking everybody is lying. And it, you know, at first, you know, people were like, oh, this guy's kind of funny, he's charismatic. Then it got dark. And then, you know, a lot of the people gravitating towards him were like crazy people too. So that's a whole other like phenomenon that's like, I think sprung up around this, that, you know, these other crazy people who are just, you know, there is something about that though. I mean, like, even for me, I mean, I don't think I'm a sociopath, but I can look at that SJWs and be like, I see you. You know, like I see what you know what I mean? Like you're just stuck in your head about something and you haven't realized it yet. And I see it. And like a lot of like normal mainstream people don't see it. They just think, oh, they're saying they're hurting. This thing must actually be hurting them. So it would be the right thing to just agree with them and just give them what they want, because clearly something's hurting them. And it's like, it's not that simple.
That's fascinating to me, this whole conversation, because you're right. It is projection. And I talk a lot about on this podcast how I think there are roughly two groups of people, and SJWs, the ones who with good intent, which are like the tools or the PC liberals, and then the ones with bad intent, who are the bad actors or the PC authoritarians. And so this guy was one of the bad actors. And so now that he's on the other side of it, and he's anti-SJW, he views everyone who's in it as being a bad actor, because that's what he was. And I think that's really,
and that's what he's,
I think it's really interesting, because those bad actors, they're not true believers. They're opportunists. So now that there are starting to be more people speaking against or waking up to what SJW ideology really is and speaking out against it in good faith, then you're going to get those opportunists going, hey, wait a minute, maybe I'm over here trying to use this ideology for more power for me, or for virtue signal for me, or whatever these bad reasons are that I'm in this belief system. But look, there's a growing resistance to it. Why don't I join the resistance and be just as much of a bad actor? But I can make money from it. I can make a name for myself, and that in the anti-SJW world. And those people, I don't know this person you're talking about specifically, but those people terrify me, whether they're on the SJW side or the anti-SJW side, because you don't represent me, dude. Like, don't.
Right.
Yeah.
They create problems. I mean, they have like a minute there where maybe they have good, because people like that are very intelligent too. It's like they have the minute of like, oh, you're offering some good insights. I get it, and then the more they gain traction with people, it's not good.
Right. And there's a danger there of, especially if they've gone over to the anti-SJW side, of once they're exposed as just opportunists, of people writing off all of the valid criticisms of the SJW ideology and lumping it all in with those people. You know, the same way that Christianity gets lumped in with the snake oil salesman Christians.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yep.
So you brought up, I have, it sounds similar as an atheist to me. The whole thing sounds very similar to religious dogma, where it's like, well, I was a Zoroastrian yesterday, but the Muslims are taking over, so now I'm a Muslim. And I don't see it as something where there's a lot of critical thought going on. It's just, it's replacing critical thought with an ideology, and the fundamental issue isn't their specific ideology, it's ideological thinking. And that person really isn't changing at all. They're just hopping from one ideology to another. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah,
yes.
that's what I think's happening, yeah.
Yes, that's what I think is happening. It's ideology hopping, but with this specific sort of, I guess, personnel. Sorry, my cat's meowing. If you hear my cat, with this, she's like walking around me meowing right now. So with this specific personality profile, it is like Keri said, it's opportunism, where they jump from one ideology to the other. You know, and it's opportunism and projecting in this particular kind of person we're discussing. But you know, there's people who, I think there's a lot of different types of crazy that ideology hop though.
So do you think that there's more ideology or more ideological thought now than there used to be? Or do you think that we're just seeing it more now? Or I don't know. Has the problem gotten worse? And if so, why?
That's a good question. It might just be that it's more visible because of the internet. You know, I remember reading about this 10, maybe a little over 10 years ago, you know, people talking about how America was already starting to break off into these little cults because you could see more and more division within, like, by neighborhood. Like, you know, we had red states and blue states, but then you just kind of had more people kind of contracting into themselves, into people who think like them, even like living in neighborhoods that tended to be like more liberal, like going to neighborhoods that were more conservative, people like starting to be very mindful of that, that's like really huge. If like where you're picking to live and you're picking out a house, you're trying to make sure there's a good school, you're doing all these other things, and then you're also being mindful of like that your neighbor has like the same politics you do, like is kind of like you know, that was getting big 10 years ago is really telling. I don't think people were into their politics, but I don't think they were hung up on the tribal part of it as much, like say 25 years ago. I don't think so.
It seems like it implies that there's not a shared set of moral beliefs, right? I feel like in the past there was kind of this shared set of moral beliefs, and then there would be Democrats and Republicans arguing about the best ways to tactically implement legislation or whatever that manifests those beliefs. But if people are starting to separate, it seems like that's got to be a consequence. Like, why would I only want to live in a neighborhood with a certain kind of political thought? Well, it's only because I must view that political thought as morally different from the other side's political thought, right?
Kind of like the parties have started to jump on totally different pages and view each other as morally inferior, even though, excuse me, I still hold out hope that it's more kind of like, I still think most people are basically good. We're just broken into very radically different looking ways of getting there, you know, where you could still have a Republican and a Democrat talk and say, agree, you know, again, bringing up like welfare or something. Yeah, no, I want poor people fed. Like, I don't want people starving to death. We have different ideas of how to arrive there. But you don't see conversations start out that way anymore, even among politicians. Even when politicians are like trying to get together and come to agreement and create policy, or when they're debating for elections, you don't see many of them kind of extend the conversation that way. Like, well, we both want to come to this conclusion. How can we get there?
But my opponent is wrong about his methods. Instead, you hear, my opponent is evil.
Is evil, right. Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it, I think. So there's a lot of that. So then that's trickled down to the public. So the public's treating each other that way, and it's not good.
Well, you could argue that the public voted for those people, and maybe those people are manifest of something that's already was there.
Could be. I mean, I kind of buy into the idea that we're still dealing with like, and it's other things too. I think we're still dealing with the after effects of like what the Russians did to us in the 50s and 60s.
Can you be like specific? Because I think you sound like a tinfoil hat wearing person now. So let people know what you're talking about.
The way that they influenced academia, the way that they influenced, people in educational institutes and people of power, some of our politicians, the way that they came to kind of like, in their really clever, they called it subversion, in their clever way, kind of like get people a little bit into some of their thinking and without them realizing it, and kind of thinking it was like their idea maybe, and sort of even if it wasn't to directly turn people communist, if nothing else, just to kind of like divide and create some chaos, and they did it for a while. They still do it now, but I think they were a lot better at it maybe 40, 50 years ago. They were doing a really good job at it. And I think they kind of planted seeds that did, it was a cultural thing, but has created a lot of chaos. I think that's part of it. I'm not saying it's the only reason.
That's interesting. I mean, we just talked about Yuri Bezmenov the other day, who I feel like you're referencing obliquely, but maybe not. He's the Russian. He defected in like what, Keri, 87 or sometimes 83,
something like that, from the KGB.
Like and his job was subversion, and he basically said like, here are the 4 stages. We're already through this first stage. We've already done this to America, and it was kind of exactly what you were talking about. It was taking over academia, taking over any kind of institutions, without a goal of implementing communism. It was just a goal of destroying the institutions
from the inside, injecting Marxism into everything.
Yeah, this is the guy who went to Canada, right? I think he ended up in America, but he went to Canada first.
Maybe. I don't know his path.
Maybe it was him. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good example of it. But I mean, but this is something that you don't even have to look at like 1 or 2 defectors who spoke up. Like, you can just kind of like find this stuff out. My uncle was a nuclear physicist. He worked on the first nuclear reactor in New England, and the KGB called him up. They tried to make friends with him.
Yeah.
They tried him out to dinner, like, and he didn't, and he told the government about it. But I mean, this is what they were doing, and they were very charming about it, and very just like whatever, so we're relations, we're just being friends here, so what were they doing to everybody else?
Yeah.
It's not hard to figure out.
Right. And if your uncle was at working on a nuclear reactor, he likely had lots of paperwork that he signed, promising, because I had a top secret clearance at one point in my life. You have to report contact with foreign agents at all. Like, if you meet someone at the gas station who's Russian, you had to report some guy. I met someone, right? But if you're a college professor, you don't have that paperwork that you're signing. And so if the KGB takes you out and says, I want to have a conversation about your English department or your, sociology department, why not? You don't have to report anything.
Mm-hmm. And then it's a thought movement and an intellectual movement, which can do more damage. And, by the 60s and 70s, the CIA knew that. You probably saw that report that came out where they were watching. They used to have like kind of stations all over the country where they were watching all over the world, not just the country. They were in other countries too. They were watching intellectuals because they were like, shit. They're like, this is how they're going to get us.
Right.
They kind of knew. They weren't very public about it, but they knew. They were like, this is where our vulnerability is among intellectuals and intellectual movements.
What is that quote about the long march through the institutions? Does one of you know that?
I don't, but we have Google.
Yeah. It reminds me of that. That's kind of a prescient.
I'll look it up. Hold on.
Yeah. While you're looking that up, I wanted to say earlier, Carter, when you were talking about how we're kind of destroying like individual cultures, where France isn't France anymore, you know. And it made me think of that joke. You guys know that joke about heaven is where the police are British, the chefs are Italian, the mechanics are German, the lovers are French, and it's all organized by the Swiss. But then hell is where the police are German, the chefs are British, the mechanics are French, the lovers are Swiss, and it's all organized by the Italians.
Funny.
I'm sure that's racist and hilarious.
It's not going to make sense in 20 years.
No, it won't. It won't. So, by the way, the Long March Through the Institutions is a German slogan coined by student activist Rudi Dutschke, I can't pronounce his name, to describe his strategy for establishing the conditions for revolution, subverting society by infiltrating institutions such as the professions. The phrase "the Long March" is a reference to the prolonged struggle of the Chinese communists. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Anyway, that was Wikipedia giving you your answer.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know, April, what do you think the solution is? What do we do?
I don't know. I've been thinking about that a while. I don't know. Few things, you know, I think people need to get involved in their local politics again to keep all this working. Get involved in your town politics, your state politics. That's actually where you have more voice. We weren't meant to have a lot of direct voice in presidential elections. People need to get back to that here, at least. And then they're controlling what they can control. You know, it's certainly not going to change the fact that people have some wildly different ideas, but maybe if we're kind of culting off in different states and different towns, and maybe people will feel like they want what they want, you know, like they want things more socialized. They can live in a more socialized state and work on that and vote for that, or their town even.
Right.
People don't want that, you know, they can make that happen in their community. And then, you know, if we had, I mean, that's where, you know, I am a little more libertarian, because it's like, then people will have what they want. People have control over it. And it won't be these like giant swaths of people like disagreeing on huge things and these sweeping policies coming out of the federal government that, like, you gotta figure, like, even if it was like, you know, even if like 52% of the population wanted that policy, that still leaves a ton of people very unhappy and not having what they want. Huge conflicts, you know. That's one of the things that I think would be better, is if people could just focus on their communities more, to kind of make things what they want and just feel more comfortable and safe, and be allowed to do that too. Because in some ways we do have federal government overreach that's kind of affecting people's mentality to think like, no, everything rides on everything that happens in the White House.
Well, of course, the federal government is a lot more powerful than it used to be, right? I mean, that it didn't used to matter as much.
Right. So that's a big thing. You know, that's if we could step back from that, I think that would help. It would give people back that feeling of power, you know, over the kind of over the life they feel like they're living, over their community, over the policies that are affecting them. So there's that, you know, there's that with the government. Then, you know, corporations are a whole other discussion, I guess. You know, those need a lid on them again too. That would help, but you know, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what it would really take to get everybody on the same page to make that happen. That's the thing. How do we get everyone on the same page? Now we've got more socialists showing up.
Well, so actually, maybe, but you made kind of a libertarian point, which I'm going as the token. I'm not even technically a libertarian, but as the token libertarian-esque guy on the show, I think it's worth underscoring. In a free society, like we can call it capitalism or libertarian-esque or whatever, but in a freer society, if you want to be a communist and have a little commune with your communist friends and all agree that you share the means of production and you're going to distribute everything, like, you're allowed to. Right. Go ahead, right?
Right.
The flip side is, if you're in a communist or a socialist state, you and your friends aren't allowed to get together and say, like, hey, we just want to be free over here in this section. Yeah. Like, that's the difference between the two, right? Right. So there's nothing wrong with letting people be different. They just need to be free enough to go experiment if that's what they want to do.
To choose it.
I mean, yeah, we have a problem that there's too many people now too. There's just too many people, and that's not even just an immigration issue. That we can talk about that in terms of immigration, but just people. I mean, and I'm not trying to say that like in a negative, like, oh, people suck, they ruin everything. No, but it's just, this stuff was easier to manage when there were just less people. That's just the reality of it. We have more people now. We have more people, more problems. You have more people. Well, that changes the gun control conversation. When you have tons of people living together, packed in these cities, living on top of each other, now like the prospect of people having guns changes. I mean, it does.
So one thing
I go back to that. I go back to what's best for that community. How does that community want to handle it? But part of it is population. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna, I think it was Keri that was talking about this, but it might. Sorry, I'm getting old. I don't even have short-term memory anymore. One of you mentioned something about the CIA. I think maybe it was you, having establishments all around the world kind of paying attention to professors, right? And I think one thing that America generally has failed to do, which the Soviets were great at, the Soviets fought an ideological battle. They spent resources and energy telling people, hey, they may change Marxist ideology in some ways, but they were saying, hey, Marxism, right? Anything that they could kind of, if they could own a philosophy department, then they would talk about postmodernism, and they would introduce Marxist ideology, and if they talked about economics, they would introduce Marxist ideology, and they were unashamed about making this a philosophical or ideological battle, and something that I think that the U.S. has failed to do as far back as I can remember, and I'm 44 years old. We never ideologically fought. I guess maybe Reagan had a few speeches once in a while about ideology, but we never say, hey, you know what, world, what makes America great, to steal Trump's phrase, like, what makes America great is individual freedom, limited government. Like, we have this constitution that outlines freedoms for our people, and like, this is it's not copyrighted. You can take it and try and implement it, and there are principles by which this country is on which this country was founded, and the Enlightenment was important. We never really talk about that. We always kind of push that aside as like, oh, that's just like philosophy, or that's just kind of, armchair stuff. It's esoteric. It doesn't matter. Let's talk about the real issue of poverty. And the other side doesn't do that. The other side recognizes the importance of ideas and the long-term impact. And the stuff you're talking about with the Soviet Union, Soviet Union's been dead for decades. We're still recovering from the ideological warfare that they were much better at than we were in many ways. And no one's really fighting that anymore. It's why we let them take over universities. And there aren't, I'm not a conservative, but there's very few conservatives on campus in academia, and that should be concerning to people, right?
Sure. I think that part of it is, I think for a while we did kind of like bang our drum for our own ideology, but the thing is part of our ideology was to extend freedom of speech and let room for other ideologies in, and it's like our strength was also our weakness. And then at some point it did take hold. And that's why, like, in schools, we don't get taught about the Enlightenment. We don't get taught about individual sovereignty. We don't get taught why these things are so important, why it took like humanity so long to kind of pop up with that idea. Like, you look at everything we had to go through to just arrive at that. Hey, maybe we just shouldn't be douches to each other. How long that took.
Yeah. How about, it's like some nascent version of the non-aggression principle took 10,000 years, basically.
So that's huge, and we don't get philosophically taught that in our schools now. I think it was spoken to a little bit more in previous generations, and I do think that we had that age of McCarthyism where there was that effort to be like, no, like there's thought movements coming in here that are bad. I do think there were efforts for it, but I think that because I don't want to say we lost it, because we didn't totally lose, but because we always wanted to make room for that freedom, because we're America, it was also our weakness.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, although I would say I wouldn't want to ban Marxists from speaking at all, and I would but I think if you don't present the counter argument, then you're left with nothing but Marxism. Like, fine, you want to teach kids about Marxism, great, but you got to teach them about the Enlightenment.
I completely agree with you, but I agree with you, and I wouldn't change the fact that we have that freedom, but I just think that that's what left the door open for it to affect us in a way that's kind of surprising, because people remember this is the risk you open yourself up to when you. It is what it is. I don't have a better solution either on that point, but I mean, the other thing is that when you think about more traditional America, and we call it the right now, but if you think about more the way it used to be, we also used to have religion. And religion was our ideology. That was our ideology that we had. Yeah.
That was the shared morals that would allow Democrats and Republicans to live in the same neighborhood and know that they both had the same moral base that they were.
But there's also something different about religion. It's not just an ideology. It's a personal. We confuse religion, which is an ideology or an institution, with the personal transformation or the personal spiritual transformation, individual transformation. That is what take Christianity, for example, that is what a Christ follower is supposed to be engaged in. So we have the wrong idea. I think culturally, Christianity has become under so much attack that people, and for some good reasons, because of the radical right that we're talking about from when we were teenagers, kids, the bad representations of Christians in the mainstream. But an actual Christianity, at least as I'm starting to understand it, is about, it's not akin to going out and saying, this is the way I'm supposed to affect radical change in the world and fix other people. It's about transforming yourself to be more like Christ. It's not about going out and condemning others. And so that I just wanted to make that point, because I've been thinking a lot about that recently. Like, how is now I'm like a new Christian, how is religion different from ideology? In some ways it's not, but in other ways, if you're looking at like the essence of a belief system that is individual, like about individual change, that's different, I think.
It depends on the belief system, because Islam is not about individual change as much as it is about, I mean, I'm sure it's about that too, but it is much more explicitly,
go out
and making the rest of the world Muslim.
Right. I want to take this back for a second to mental illness, because I know we have to wrap up soon. We're going a little over, but in the news, you were asking how to change things. There was a recent case, it's going around on social media right now, of a woman in Oregon who just got arrested for at a abortion provider. She ran out. There was a pro-life protester out there, a man, and she ran up to him and shoved a bloody menstrual pad into his mouth and told him to eat it, and was screaming at him. Yeah. Did you hear this, April? It's disgusting. I'm sorry.
Assault. I mean, depending on what diseases she has, it could be pretty significant.
That's
right. So
not funny.
It's not funny because it's so dark and it's so gross, but like that
it's
is
also
mental
funny.
illness.
We can laugh. I mean, it's funny and horrible at the same time. It's okay.
But that's what I was talking about that with a friend. It's like, there's some mental illness there. I mean, how do you do that to someone? There's something wrong. And that's not the only case I've seen. There's a whole compilation, on YouTube of different, I'm sure some of the classic SJWs that we've seen melting down on YouTube, the girl screaming and crying and throwing the trash can. And there are a lot of these different public expressions of something that's wrong and of this outrage expressing itself. Yeah.
Wrong or something else happened. And, I think I mentioned to you, I think a while back about, it was 9 years ago now, my brother suddenly died. And like, I was not normal for a while after that. And that affected some of my things that I was following. Like I started to get like extra hyper focused on like, my food, and also like where I started to be, I'm trying to summarize it, so focused on like not harming anything. It was like its own obsession. Like I was, one of those people, I was like deep researching where like anything came from, any of my clothes that I bought, if it was like at all touched to like any sweatshops anywhere in the world, any of my, anything I bought, anything I touched, like my car, like I remember going to buy a car and it technically had like a tiny bit of leather somewhere in it. And you know what I mean? I was getting like really hyper focused on these things and like, you know, not killing any insects and that I might step on a bug. I was upset about driving because I was driving on bugs. It's, you know what I mean? Like I got really into this in my head for a while, and I still don't kill bugs when I find them. I put them outside and that's good, you know, but you know, I was just trying to like, I was just being crazy because I was trying to like cope with what happened. In my grief, I was like negotiating things and thinking that like I was just so upset. I just thought I had to be this way. And I'm thinking of like everybody else who suffers and dies and like how I can like, you know, contract myself to the point where I'm not part of any of it and like somehow not, you know, which turns into just not even participating in life. Right. You know, and, you know, and it also didn't bring him back. You know, it's just like something you go through, you know, but I worked through. The point is I worked through it. You know,
you didn't live there.
I didn't stay there. I did what people kind of should do. People go through those things, you know. So it's like when I see that, when I see somebody getting, and now it's the past couple of years, it's been this SJW stuff. When I see people possessed by it and they're acting out that way, I'm like, this is something else. Like I can see it. Like something else happened to them. It might be like an inborn biological problem they had, but a lot of them had something happen, you know, or if they're in college, they're still mad at something one of their parents did or something, you know what I mean? And they just haven't worked through it, and they're being encouraged to stay in it and keep acting it out and even create policy over it. And that's just terrible.
Yeah.
It's the worst place to be in.
Well, is it, I think it's Jordan Peterson, whom you referenced earlier, which is, you know, make your damn bed, right? Before you go telling everyone else to do what they should do and how to run the world, go make your bed.
Right.
And so maybe that's
what you can do.
That's what you can do. Just go make
that's what you can do. Deal with what, like April said, on the local political level, like deal with what you can change. And on the smallest level, that's dealing with yourself and your issues. And I think
someone control, you know, be reasonable about it and realistic about it. You know, and you know, if something bad has happened, you can't really put that on the world.
Yeah.
Guilty admission. I've done that before too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, any closing thoughts? I know you've got to run, April, so we can't keep you any longer. Any closing thoughts you wanna give us?
No, it's been great. This has been really fun. I'm glad we were able to make this happen, and you know, this is great. I like talking with you guys. Like we should do it again.
It was a lot of fun. Oh yeah, we should definitely do it again. So, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time.
Thanks, April.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. Have a good day. I'll talk to you later.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.